Now, the reason for it is that there's one person who's been missing a lot of class because, first of all, the student got the flu, and as she was recovering from the flu, she got COVID. So she's been out for, and I said that I'll look to see if I have it recorded. Because when COVID came around in 2020, I was teaching 101B, and I started recording them for that semester, put them up for the students. But that was starting in March, and I haven't updated that in this case, so those are the only recordings I have. So I really appreciate it. I'll let you know which ones. Okay. Looks like a lot of people stay home today. Probably working on labs for tomorrow. Okay, you sign up. Okay. Make sure you sign in. How many bills in here? 1, 2, 3, 4. More than about 55%. Is traffic bad? Yeah, you need to study them there. I come from Danville. Anyway, show must go on. All right, so for tomorrow's lab is starting diversity, and I haven't started lecturing on it here, but that's okay, because what you're going to be doing is coming in and looking at the major groups of eukarya, and one of those groups, these are called supergroups, and so you'll be looking at some live specimens. Okay, one of the types of live specimens happen to live inside of the guts of termites, so I'm going to have live termites there. And what you will do, take a microscope slide and put a drop of saline solution on it, pick up a termite between your fingers with its butt sticking out, and gently squeeze. Okay, you're going to force it to defecate and rub its butt in the juice and look at it under a microscope. And I hope there should be a trichonympha, something called trichonympha, which is a real cute multi-flagellate thing that really moves around. So they're cute. Anyway, that's what we're doing. So I'm even though I'm behind here on lecturing, I'll catch up, hopefully. Okay. So grab onto those pencils because I'm going to run through this real quickly. All right, where did I leave off?
Slide 4, talking about amber.
Ah, yeah. Okay. Types of fossils. Okay. Petrification. Amber. What is amber? Okay. Amber is tree resin. Okay. So that it's fossilized tree resin. Whenever a tree gets wounded, in fact, you've probably seen it if you pay attention to wounded trees, is that sap comes out. Okay. So certain species of trees, this is real sticky, and it's a way that the tree is protecting its wound. And sometimes leaves, insects, and other small things will fall into that sap. The sap eventually hardens. When the tree dies, it falls off, this gets buried, and it goes up there. A lot of chemical changes, and this is what produces amber. Okay, and so you have an insect embedded in the amber, and it is almost perfectly preserved after millions and millions of years. Okay, I worked with some amber insects, the Dominican Republic. That's about 35 to 40 million years old. And I take sandpaper, grind the amber down to where it was just within half a millimeter of the insect, polish it, and look at it under the microscope. Really fascinating. So this is amber. Amber, various types of amber comes. It depends on the age. Like Lebanese amber is 120 million years old. Burmese amber or Myanmar amber, that's probably about 80 million years old. But there was one tiny dinosaur tail with feathers that happened to be found in that type of amber. So we have up close look at a dinosaur feather, right? But anyhow, that's amber, and it's real good. Okay, so this imprint fossil, fish. Okay, this probably, it looks like it's probably Mesozoic, and other types of things. This here, scorpion and amber, okay, details are really there. Back in the 1980s, 90s, they had the big idea that maybe they could get DNA out of these things. No, DNA is way, like it decays quite a bit, even in amber. And so I know a story of a beetle that was in Lebanese amber, so it's about 120 million years old, and it was a unique specimen, only one we had, and some people in Southern California broke it open, ground up the whole thing, so now we don't have the fossil anymore. Trying to get DNA out of it, there's no DNA, okay? The oldest ancient DNA that so far has successfully been obtained is about 1 billion years old, and that's a rarity, a real rarity. But still, the rest of it is nice and preserved. Okay, these are other fossils. That's still bone, but it's been mineralized. When it's been buried in soil, water seeps through, that's laden with various types of ions, and the ions will crystallize and replace organic material. And still, so that's mostly still stone instead of bone. And this is a petrified tree from Arizona, dinosaur femur. It's this part of the leg right here. And it's still highly mineralized. These are all fossils. Now, this has been a picture in your textbook for the last 4 editions. It is wrong. It says it's a mosquito in amber. I'm an insect specialist, okay, that was my PhD. That is not a mosquito, it is a termite, okay? And you might say, I've never seen termites with wings. Yes, the reproductives do have wings. The workers, they don't, okay? That's also true of ants, all right? And you can even have fossils that are frozen, okay? This is not the fossil, okay? Husks of mammoth, and some of the mammoths that they found frozen in Siberia, they are so well preserved that you could cook the meat, okay? And so a lot of people have been, some labs have been talking about taking DNA out of this frozen material and putting it into a denucleated elephant egg, putting it into an elephant, and trying to bring these things back, okay? I don't know about that. What's the mammoth going to do when the world has changed so much, okay? I don't know if it would be successful. So far, anything like that has failed, all right? When we're trying to take the DNA from one species that no longer exists and putting the DNA into close relative, they have all failed. Okay. All right, now, how do we date fossils? How do we know how old they are? Okay, there's 2 different approaches to this. The one is radiometric decay, that we can figure out the age. But geologists all the way back to the 19th century still put together what is called a relative time scale. Because the relative time scale, or the geological time scale, it's all based on the whole geological principle, what is called the principle of superposition. Now, this is mostly true of sedimentary rock, right? Remember that I mentioned there were 3 types of rock: sedimentary rock, igneous rock, metamorphic rock. And so even this principle of superposition still works also for igneous rock as well. But mostly sedimentary rock is where you find fossils, right? And all this is due to erosion, deposition of material, clay, sand, and later as it's buried, and anything that's buried with it, it may mineralize, be cemented together as water moves through, and you have precipitation of minerals that happen to be in the water. And so, when we have these layers, obviously the oldest layer, these are called strata. Stratum is singular, okay? You're going to have to learn a little bit about Latin and Greek plurals, all right? So this is singular. If you replace this and put an A at the end, that makes it plural, okay? So superposition is that when we have these layers, then this must be the youngest, and that must be the oldest, because obviously they're deposited one after another. And so with regard to relative dating, all we're saying is that this is older than that. Okay, we're not putting an absolute time on it, just a relative time. And usually what the geologists have done is that they name these rocks according to certain geological ages. And we'll get to that in a moment. Now, if we have a magmatic igneous intrusion that happened, say, magma seeps in here. So the red part here is molten rock that was melted and it went through cracks through here, okay? Still relative dating can work here. We know that this must be younger than the stratum through which it penetrated, because the stratum, the rock in which it penetrated, had to be there in order for the magma to penetrate. And therefore, this is younger, or this is younger than that. And so it's just a matter of where things happen to be. All right, now, the thing is, all of the geological column, all the rocks are not found in any one place. Even in the Grand Canyon, that's about 1 billion years of history, but there's big gaps there, okay? They're called nonconformities. You don't need to know that word, but what happens is that that was a shallow sea where sediments could be deposited, but at a later time it uplifted, it was dry land, and therefore many of the strata exposed to erosion are gone. And so there's big gaps in time there, all right? So how to put together various rocks that are exposed upon the surface to be able to tell that they belong to the same age. For example, rocks that are exposed in England versus rocks that are exposed in France, okay? How do you put them together? Well, a lot of times they use index fossils, okay? So if there's a certain reliable group of fossils, so we're not talking about just one type of species, but several species that occurred together in one place, and we find them somewhere else in another layer, say in France, that the same fossils happen to be there, it's reasonable to believe that the layer in France and the layer in England must have laid down at the same time, okay? But there's more to it. It isn't just the fossil assemblages in one layer, but what about the next layer, next layer, next layer? So there has to be a match between these two places. And therefore they can put together, and sometimes even fill in some of the gaps. Okay, just a simple illustration here. This is one site where we have layer E, F, and Z, Y, B, and so forth. Another site that has and I didn't put here, I put fossils X, Y, and Z, but say each one of these layers has their own group of index fossils, okay? We know the E here and E here, same age. This doesn't have any F, all right? But it has, and that one doesn't have any D, but we have C, okay? And so if we put these two together, comparing the two areas, then F and D must be somewhere between C and E. Now, we don't have enough information here to be able to tell, did D come first or F? It's ambiguous in that sense. But nonetheless, this is sandwiched in between C and E, which occur in both site 1 and 2, and therefore D and F must be somewhere in between. And so this is the way in which they build the geological column, trying to figure out what is what. Now, as far as putting absolute ages here, relative age, we know that B is younger than Z, okay? Because of the principle of superposition. However, if we have a volcanic eruption and a layer there, that can be dated. And I'll come back to how dating, absolute dating with radioactive materials happens to operate. The simple sedimentary rock, there's no direct way to be able to date it, only relative. okay? And just to show this is a figure I got from somewhere, I don't remember where, but in the southwestern part of the United States, there's various canyons that happen to be exposed, but not, and they share a few layers, but not all. For example, here is the Grand Canyon, Zion Canyons National Park in Utah, Mesa Verde, which is in Colorado, yes.
So on the previous slide, I had a question. How far would the sites have to be, like geographically, for you to actually?
How far away?
How far would the two sites have to be from each other? Like, in terms
From
of
this layer?
Well, no, from like site A and site 2, like.
They could be, depending on what the index fossils happen to be, they could be pretty far apart.
Okay.
Okay, because we can still correlate rocks that are exposed in North America with those in Europe or in with Africa. However, you have to be really, really picky about what fossils you're using. Especially if you go back about 300 million years ago, all the continents were together, and especially with terrestrial animals and plants, they could move. But after Pangea split up, then we get the evolution of different plants and animals in Africa than we have in South America, and so you have to be real careful. However, in the marine habitat, okay, with clams, the ocean climate is pretty uniform, okay, and so that you can have similar species of the same species on both sides of the Atlantic. And therefore, if it's marine deposits, those are pretty reasonable to use index fossils to correlate what they are. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Okay. All right, so here, various rocks. This is Grand Canyon. It's relatively low, and therefore, but at Zion, there's a few layers here. Calabab and Calabab Formation. Cape Townsend isn't there. That is there. And so we can link them together. This is the same formation. Now we have a couple more up here, comparing this to canyons. Carmel Formation is in there, Navajo sandstone. That's real thick. Now what the Navajo sandstone, the sandstone, these are fossilized dunes, okay? Sand dunes, all right? And then so forth. Wingate, they're all there. And then put together here Mesa Verde and so forth. And so this cross-referencing of different identified strata can now give us a geological column that we can draw that goes from here all the way down to here by putting down what we call the geological column. Okay, let's go back. All right, so what geologists have done starting in the 19th century was to find these various rock layers and give them and divide them sort of like a Linnaean classification into a broad time category, and within that broad, which was called an eon, okay? So this is a broad period of time. Within that broad period of time, however, it is broken down into shorter time units called eras into periods into epochs, and so forth. Now, as far as, I'm just going to give you an overview of the geological record, and you're not going to have to know every single period, okay? In fact, you won't have to know any periods whatsoever, okay? However, I'm very fond of the Mesozoic, and so there's only 3 periods. I really encourage you to know them, okay? But I don't require it. Eras and eons, yes, I do want you to know them. So we'll go into it. The oldest, which doesn't exist on Earth, okay, we have no rocks, but still we know that Earth is 4.6 billion, at least we believe, 4.6 billion years old, and that is called the Hadean. And so we have nothing from there. And actually now the time has shifted as to what defines the Hadean. It's 4.6 to about 4.04. Okay, they found relatively recently some older rocks. Okay, but this is a time that the Earth was cooling. We don't know too much about it. Okay, the oldest rocks are Archean, and you change this to 4 billion. Okay, 4.0. We'll round it up to 2.5 billion years ago. And once again, there's not a whole lot going on in that area. These are eons. So I'm giving you, first of all, the brown eons. And usually what marks one eon from another are some event, reproducible event that they can find in the rock record, okay, exposed on surface. There's something there that marks. Once we get life further down here, it's changes of life forms that mark the end of one period or era and another. Okay, and Proterozoic. This occurs from 2.5 billion to about 500 million years ago. Okay, and the end of it is marked by what in the 19th century they called the Cambrian explosion, because there was a sudden abundance of fossil animals. Okay, which sort of made it look like creation. However, there's a better explanation, because we do find at the time Darwin, they didn't find anything older in fossils than 542 million years ago, but we now have quite a few fossils that are older. The thing is, what is preserved in a fossil is not soft tissue, okay? It has to be hard parts. And so the earliest animals were pretty squishy, like earthworms, okay? They didn't have hard parts. And so this sort of marked the period of the evolution of hard parts, such as scales, teeth, bone, and things like that. Now, don't get me wrong, there are certain conditions where soft tissues can be observed in fossils, but they're rare. It really involves very special circumstances, such as fine clay that was, the animal was buried real quickly. And so, yes, we do, for some dinosaurs, we do have skin impressions, but they're not very common, okay? Bones are pretty common. Now, these three, very often in the old literature, are called Precambrian. I prefer in this class we don't use that word. I really want you to know these eons. And close to the approximate dates. Okay, if you just get close, you don't have to know these right on. The 4.6 would be nice, because that's what we believe our solar system, the age. But if you said 4.6 to 3.7 on an exam or a quiz, I'm not going to follow it. All right, I just want to have some idea as to when these things happen. Okay, so, but these are eons, and for these eons, you don't have to worry about any eras. The only thing that I want eras to be known is in Phanerozoic. Okay, Phanerozoic started at the end of the Proterozoic, so 5.542 billion years ago, or 542 million years ago, and it's divided into 3 eras. And I want you to know these eras. Paleozoic, and it's somewhere, this has usually now been updated to 254, but if you say 250, that's a good approximation. Okay, it's okay. Mesozoic, about 250 to 65 million years ago. And we're in the Cenozoic since then, okay? And as I said, the Mesozoic is divided into 3 periods. You don't have to know them, but I'll be using those words, but I'll never ask about them on an exam, okay? Okay, so this here, figure in your book, a table, this is not to scale at all, okay? But it's showing the eons and Hadean, Archean, Proterozoic. But remember that these 3 right here constitutes most of Earth's history. Most of Earth's history, okay? This has been expanded to Phanerozoic simply because this is where most of the fossils come from. And the thing is that fossils get rarer and rarer and rarer the further back you go in time, simply because the Earth's surface is dynamic. And so things have been exposed, eroded. Furthermore, things that contain fossils got buried deep, which subject to a lot of pressure and temperature, they have become metamorphic rock and no longer contain fossils. Fossil abundance gets better and better the closer we come to our time. Okay? You get more abundant fossils during the Cenozoic than you do during the Mesozoic and so forth. Okay? All right, and this is telling some things about the appearance of certain organisms. I'm going to give you an overview of that momentarily. All right, so now you don't have to know this. I just wanted to point out, if we were to take the history of the Earth and scale it to 1 year, when do things really happen? Okay, our first Paleozoic Cambrian explosion. Why is this called the Cambrian explosion? Because the first period of the Paleozoic is called the Cambrian. Okay, so it said pre-Cambrian. But that is November 18th. Everything before November 18th was pre-Cambrian. Okay, the oldest part of the Earth. Okay, but our first fossils of life don't really show up until March 20th. And look at some of the other things. Let me see here. That's the beginning of the Mesozoic, December 12th. And first dinosaurs, a day later, in the late Triassic. And down here, first flowering plants, December 22nd. Homo sapiens pops up on the last day, 31st of December, just a few seconds before midnight. Okay, we haven't been here long. Okay, we're very new, and so forth. And I don't know why this put in the U.S. Revolutionary War. Why? There's more significant events than that. But anyhow, I didn't make this up. I took it from somewhere else. All right, give you some idea that most of Earth's history is really far back in time. All right, so relative dating, but how do we know how old these rocks are? And there's many types of absolute dating techniques. Some of them are quite new, and I'm only going to talk about radioactive isotopes and how they work. Radioactive isotopes, what's an isotope? First of all, tell me what an isotope is.
Different weighted elements.
It's what?
A different weighted element.
Okay, it's an atom of an element that, why would they have a different weight?
They have a different neutron count, but.
They have a different number of neutrons. They all have the same number of protons, but not neutrons. And some of them are unstable, and they will decay. And with decay, that means the parts of their nucleus will fall apart, and they will be transformed into another element. And I'm not going to go into, there's 3 different types of radioactive decay. I'm not going to worry about that. That's something in chemistry or physics that you'll go into, but I'm not going to bother with it here. But nonetheless, some important ones. Carbon-14, the most common, there's 3 forms of carbon. Carbon-12, the most abundant. Carbon-13, carbon-14. Carbon-13 and 12 are stable, all right? 14 is not. And we calculate the time that they decay in terms of half-life. Now, you can do a differential equation, come up with a formula that gives you decay rate at any time period, but in here, we're just going to stick with half-life. Now, what is a half-life? A half-life is the amount of time it takes a certain amount of a radioactive material to decay by half. Exactly 1/2. Okay? And for carbon-14, the half-life is 5,730 years. Now, on any quiz or exam, I would give you, usually I make up elements that or radioactive decay stuff that's I just make it up, and I would tell you what the half-life is. Okay, so you don't have to memorize half-life. So the only thing I want you to know about carbon-14, would you be able to use this to date a 80 million year old fossil? No. In fact, the limit of carbon-14 is about 50,000 years. Okay, there would be so little of it left that it's undetectable. Okay, and usually this is detected by mass spectrometry. And so, various other elements will be a little bit longer. Okay, for example, I'll come back to that in a moment. Something that's real common is potassium 40. Okay, it has a half-life of 1,300 billion years. Okay, now this is used quite a bit. If I go back, let me go back here, with radioactive, one more, okay, there. If we're fortunate enough, we have sedentary rock, and there is a volcanic eruption, that can be dated using potassium 40. Okay, because what potassium 40 decays into is a gas, argon. Now, that was molten rock when it was laid down. There's no gas in the molten rock, okay? It's pretty certain because it's too hot, gases would escape. So we can say that there was no argon gas in the deposit. So once we have that deposit, then we can calculate how much argon, because once the rock has been solidified, the argon would accumulate as bubbles inside of the rock, and we can calculate the ratio between potassium 40 and argon to determine how old it is. Okay, for example, let's say that we have a certain amount of rock, and at the beginning, when it was laid down, let's say that the amount of potassium 20, let's say that we had 100 micrograms within the sample. Then after one half-life, that is 1.3 billion years, then we will only have 50 micrograms left. But we would have argon, 0, 50. The ratio between after one half-life is 1 to 1. And then after another half-life, then this 50, that's argon, is not radioactive. It doesn't decay, but this does. And it will decay to 25 micrograms, and now we have 75 micrograms of the argon. What ratio do we now have? It's a 1:3 after 2 half-lives. Okay? And I'm going to leave it up to you to figure out 3, 4 half-lives. Each time, this will decay. This now decays to 12.5, and we have here 87.5, and so forth. Okay? So that's how these can be dated. Now, that sometimes creates a problem because, for the simple reason that there's some rocks that are far from any volcanic. So if we have a volcanic layer right here, this can be dated, and the dates for these that are somewhat close to it can be estimated by the thickness. But the margin of error increases the further you get away, okay, to the point where A may not be easily dated anymore. So geologists, paleontologists, they really like to see volcanic material. But there's also newer techniques that I'm not going to talk about that can be used to date some of these other layers, even without any volcanic activity. I'm going to jump back here to carbon-14. Carbon-14 is real good for dating recent biological material, okay, within the last 50,000 years. Okay, now, one of the problems here is that we know this is made of carbon-14. It's made by a reaction with nitrogen way up in the upper atmosphere, okay? And so we know that the rate at which this is produced in the atmosphere varies from time period to time period. That's a problem, okay? That's a real problem, because what happens, of course, with any living organism, they take in carbon dioxide, the plants do, converting it into organic material through photosynthesis, Animals eat it, and therefore carbon-14 is part of the organic material that makes up the body. And it's in equilibrium at the time the animal dies. Carbon-14 content is in equilibrium with the amount that happens to be in the atmosphere, okay? Eventually, though, it'll start to decay, the carbon dioxide, because they're no longer accumulating carbon dioxide. They're dead. They don't eat anymore, all right? Now, one of the problems, though, is maybe 10,000 years ago, the amount of carbon-14 that was produced in the atmosphere is no longer, it's not as it is today. So this can be calibrated by a process called dendrochronology. Now, what is dendrochronology? We have a lot of trees that, when a tree grows, it lays down in its wood a growth layer. It's equal to 1 year. And this is in the wood, something called xylem. You'll learn about that a little bit later on. Don't worry about it now. But nonetheless, these are annual rings. And therefore, we can count, if we come out here to the far outside, some of these trees can live for 2,000 to 4,000 years. Depends on the type of tree. And each of these layers, a lot of times, are not the same width. Why would it be broad? Is because it was a rainy year and it grew fast. If it's a drought, then it's a very thin layer, okay? Furthermore, each of these layers have deposited carbon-14. Carbon-14, which was in equilibrium with the carbon-14 in the atmosphere at that time. And therefore, we can take samples of each of these rings and figure out what was the concentration of carbon-14 in the atmosphere at the time it was laid down, and be able to calibrate the dates. Now, this can be calibrated back right now to about 45,000 years. How can you do this? Well, this is a living tree, but there's now fossil trees in the same area. There were maybe 2,000 that died maybe 2,000 years ago. And if we align the rings, okay, these outer rings, we want these inner rings. This is a young tree that we have today. They will match like barcodes with a certain section of a much, much older tree. And therefore we can push the time further back by overlaying trees. And that's what dendrochronology is all about. So the carbon-14 record can be correctly assessed for about 45 to 50,000 years, but not beyond that.
How would we make use of trees that died like 2,000 years ago?
Well, we have the fossil, right? Okay, so it's a fossil tree. It's been buried. We find it in the vicinity, and we just match up because of these tree rings, annual tree rings. Some of them being narrow, wide, etc. It creates a very unique pattern. Okay, and if you can find some of these inner rings in a tree that's alive now, with some of the outer rings of an old fossil tree, then we know that they occurred at the same time. Therefore, with the older tree, we can trace toward the inside of it and go further back in time. Okay, that's how it works. All right. Okay, so this is how absolute ages have been put on the fossils of rocks, and of course, the time has been fairly stable. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go very rapidly through events that we see in the fossil record. When did first things occur, etc. I do want you to know the list I'm giving you here, you don't need to know the absolute date, okay? I do want you to know the era or the eon in which it occurs, whichever is more precise. Eon only for the first 3 eras, or first eons. And then the Phanerozoic, that will be one that I want you to know the eras, okay? Just 3 of them. And you don't need, although I'll put up dates here, I'm going to mention periods in the fossil record. You don't need to know them. I won't ask you about them on an exam. But I do want you to know the chronological order in which things were occurring. And I'm going to be only pointing out some of the most major events in Earth's history. So, Archean, the oldest rocks, once again, revise that, 4 billion, okay? 4 billion. And notice I've left out the Hadean because we have no Hadean rocks, so don't know anything about Archean. But within the Archean, at 3.5 billion years ago, we have our oldest fossils. The oldest fossils have been found on Earth, and they are of bacteria, okay? Bacteria, very small, and you're probably not gonna find them in something like sandstone, okay? Because with sandstone, the grains are very big, bigger than the bacteria. So this requires some real fine sediment, clay, okay? Real fine clay minerals to be able to show these things up. So for the first 1.5 billion years, 1.5 billion years of life, that's all we have, just bacteria, prokaryotes, that's all. And within this Archean, in fact, some of the oldest bacterial fossils are cyanobacteria. Now, what's significant about cyanobacteria is that this is a group of bacteria that engage in oxygenic photosynthesis, just like land plants, okay? What I mean by oxygenic, there's other bacteria that are photosynthetic. They can use carbon and some other energy source to produce organic material, but they do not produce oxygen as a waste. So cyanobacteria produce molecular oxygen as a waste product, okay? And that's significant. So some fossils, I'll show a picture of it. So notice the scale, okay? Micrometers, all right? So a lot of these cyanobacteria, they occur in filaments, okay? Chain of cells. You'll see some of them a little bit later on. Not of cyanobacteria, but of some other eukaryotes. But yeah, these are very clearly cyanobacteria. There's no problem with that. Now, why is this significant? I said early on, in fact, last week, Thursday, at the very end, that the original Earth's atmosphere had no oxygen. It was a reducing atmosphere. We had no molecular oxygen. So where did it come from? Photosynthesis, okay? So the oxygen in our atmosphere appears to be, at least we believe, that it is of biological origin, all right? So, 3.5 billion years ago, cyanobacteria show up. By 2.7, we have measurable amounts. From the fossil deposits, we can tell that there were measurable amounts of oxygen in the atmosphere starting to accumulate. Some of the evidence for this is that a lot of our iron oxide, iron deposits date to this time. Now, where did that come from? In a reducing atmosphere without oxygen, iron is in a form that's pretty soluble in water, okay? But once it combines with oxygen, it forms rust. Iron oxide, which precipitates out, forming ore deposits, okay? So most of our ore deposits come from that time. So that's in the Archean. Next period, Proterozoic. Okay, so the events that happened in the Proterozoic, about 1.5 billion years ago, we have our oldest known undisputed eukaryote fossil with a nucleus. It's Tepanium, it's up here. Exactly what group of eukaryotes it belongs to can't be assigned, but nonetheless, it's the oldest fossil we have. Now, does this mean that this is when they evolved? No, they could have occurred much earlier. It's just this is the oldest document that we have for the occurrence of eukaryotes. By 1.2 billion years, we have the first multicellular eukaryotes. And these are all algae. Okay, now, this word alga, algae, alga, alga is singular, algae, put an A-E on it, then it's plural. That's not a taxonomic group, okay? It's not monophyletic. We have many different groups of algae that they evolved independently in different lineages. This is just sort of an older term. Any non-plant that was photosynthetic was called an alga, regardless of its relationships. And we still continue to use that word, all right? And then 700 million years ago, we now start having not only the algae, but soft-bodied animals, okay? Usually these are very worm-like. In fact, the oldest ones, in fact, are sort of disc-shaped, flat. They almost look like plants. In fact, they used to be thought that they were plants, but they're not. They were animals. And their relationship to modern groups of animals is really obscure, not really known. But these still multicellular. 650 million years ago, we have evidence of almost the whole Earth freezing, okay? Glaciers, when they move, they leave very distinct types of erosion in the rocks. And we find some of this glaciation that dates to this period very, very close to the equator. So at this time, there was just a narrow strip close to the equator that was ice-free. So this is referred to as snowball Earth. And then by 450 million years ago, the beginning of the Paleozoic Cambrian explosion. We now have a fair abundance of animal fossils. So this is based primarily on animals. We had algae, because those fossils pretty well preserved earlier during the Proterozoic, simply because they have cell walls of cellulose, which do preserve pretty well as fossils. Animals by this time, they have shells, some sort of scales that are hard on the outside, and therefore preserve as fossils. And so now we're in the Paleozoic. So Paleozoic, approximately 540 to 250 million years. And I'm still going to be mentioning some of the periods here, but you don't need to know that. The oldest fossils we have are things like sponges and other types of life that no longer exist. No longer on land. A little bit later, some sort of primitive moss-like plants. So during the early part, we get marine diversification. The number of species of various groups of marine animals starts to expand because speciation. Our oldest vertebrates, now we pay attention to that because that's a group we belong to. Okay, vertebrate is an animal that has a backbone, all right? And so they first show up about 525 million years ago. And then the first land plants and fungi show up in the fossil record. And this is during a time that's called the Ordovician period. So that's closer to about 470 million, 490 million years ago, all right? This is important. Algae-like critters have now evolved onto land, okay? Fungi, fossils of fungi, they were around before this. But here, this is referring to the first terrestrial fungi. And then Silurian, first land animals. Now, keep this straight, it's not the first animals. First animals that we can see in the fossil record are way back here, okay? Proterozoic, we still have some animals there, but they're all marine. They're all in the ocean deposits. This here, I'm referring to the first land animals. Right up there, okay? And these first land animals, they were centipede-like. They're arthropods. Okay, that's a major group of organisms. Arthropods include centipedes, millipedes, spiders, crustaceans, insects. Insects are the biggest group, all right? And then our first jawed fish. The earliest fish, they're vertebrates. They did not have jaws. Okay, they probably were Tritus feeders, fed on decaying organic minerals or material that happened to be on the sea floor. But this here, development of jaws, and the jaws come from pharyngeal gill slits. Okay, the anterior most pharyngeal gill slits. I mentioned that the pharynx, this is the area called the pharynx, and in vertebrate or animal, vertebrate embryos, they develop these pharyngeal slits, which in many fishes will become gills. But these anterior slits have developed into movable jaws. Okay, and then Devonian is getting toward the end, the first land vertebrates from lobe-finned fish. Okay, I mentioned Tiktaalik some time ago, a couple weeks ago. It's a transitional form between a lobe-finned fish and an amphibian. Okay, has characteristics of both. Those are the first critters that crawled, vertebrates that crawled off land. Okay, so in this scenario that I'm going through, keep straight the first vertebrates, which were all marine, versus the first land vertebrates. Okay, that's a significant evolutionary step, moving from water to land. All right, and then Paleozoic Carboniferous, first insects that we find on land, and first seed plants. That's another important thing. Okay, the earliest plants did not produce seeds. Seeds are real important because they're a way of getting away from the water for reproduction. Okay, the earliest plants, just like amphibians and animals, their reproduction is still tied to the watery environment that they emerged from, evolved from. And that's also true of plants, okay? But with a seed, these types of plants can reproduce far away from the water. They don't have to be in the water, okay? And these are called gymnosperms. Pine trees, redwood, those conifers, these are members of gymnosperms. And the first amniotes. Okay, now what's an amniote? I mentioned that they have a special type of egg. Okay, so that once the egg is fertilized, there's what are called extra embryonic layers that also develop from the zygote that do not have anything to do with, or they're not part of the embryo. We'll come back and talk about amniotes a little bit later on. But what are amniotes? They are land vertebrates, reptiles, mammals, birds. Okay, but not amphibians. Frogs, salamanders are not amniotes, right? They are terrestrial vertebrates, but not amniotes. And then the last part, Permian, ancestors of mammals. Okay, these are called synapsids, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. Okay, they're amniotes. In fact, let me just give you a little introduction here to amniota. It'll come back. We'll go into more details a little bit later. What was significant about the amniotes is that they, due to those extra embryonic layers on their egg, including something called a chorion, they could lay eggs on land. Okay, that was significant. They didn't have to go back like frogs and salamanders and breed in the water and produce young that breed by means of gills. These things were born on land. So two major branches, evolutionary branches that came from the amniota. One of them, Synapsida, Cerapsida. Okay, this here, for all practical purposes, in here, we can call it reptilian. Okay, taking into regard some ancient fossils, there really is a slight difference between this term and that term. Okay, but we'll stick with this. So synapsids eventually become what evolves out of them that we still have today as mammals. But there were other groups down here that, when I say stem groups, these are all extinct. But they're in the lineage. So remember, crown group. What is a crown group? Crown group is based on, okay, duck-billed platypus, which is alive today, and let's say cow, that works. Their most recent common ancestor, that's the crown. It includes all living mammals, all living mammals. But we do have mammals down here that are part of the stem, fossils that are extinct. And so this is what I'm talking about. The first ones that arose up are at the end of the Paleozoic. Now, if we have fossils for one of these branches, that means that the other branch had to exist as well. Okay, you can't have one without the other. Even if you don't have fossils, we know that they had to be there. Okay, but we do have plenty of fossils throughout. This here is a fossil synapsid. And in your childhood, what is that? All of you have seen dinosaur books, right? Most kids are raised on dinosaur books. What is that? Do you know what that critter is? Huh? Well, none of you know that? Gosh, your parents cheated you out of your childhood. I can't believe that. Dimetrodons? Now, do you call that a dinosaur? Would you call that a dinosaur? How about this thing over here? Does that look like a dinosaur? Would you call that a dinosaur? Didn't you see books like this as a kid? Yeah. But now you're afraid. What's he up to? What's he up to? He's going to trick me into something. No, this is more related to you than it is to a dinosaur. This is a synapsid. It's part of our group. This is our great grandfather. All right. So these are not dinosaurs. Nonetheless, that's when they arose. And now within the Phanerozoic, these eras, Paleozoic, Mesozoic, they're all marked by very distinct events. The beginning of the Paleozoic, the sudden appearance of many fossils. The end of mass extinction, a very major mass extinction, 250 million years ago. This wiped out estimated about 95% of multicellular life. 95% of everything in the fossil record disappears. And only 5% make it over into the next layer of fossils. Okay, so this is called the Permian crisis. Called Permian crisis because Permian was the last period of the Paleozoic. And I said 95, 96, marine animals, but they also have this for terrestrial animals as well. At least 70 for terrestrial animals, 70 to 90% extinction rate. So what happened? Climate changed a lot. There was massive eruptions of flow basalts in what is now Siberia. Okay, so I say volcanic, it's not like a volcanic cone. It was basaltic flows that come out of a fissure, a crack in the earth, and spread. And they're almost a couple of miles thick. All right, so what accompanies this flow? It's a type of volcanic eruption that in our lifetimes we have never seen. Okay, it was very massive. And that's putting a lot of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the air, which creates sulfur dioxide mixing with water, creates sulfuric acid. And so the environment, marine environments became very acidic. And this is probably a very climate, really changed the climate and killed off a lot of things. Now, this wasn't sudden, okay? We're talking about over a period of about 5 to 6 million years, all right? So it's a fairly long time period. Now, before that, all the continents had come together to form Pangaea. That probably didn't help things very well. Let's go here, what we believe the early Earth, it's late Cretaceous, that's Cambrian. This is Pangaea, okay, about that time. 250 million years ago. All the continents were joined together, at least the major shield part. The shield happens to be real hard rock, it's very, very ancient, okay, at the base. They all came together, and so we had a continent that reached from South Pole almost to the North Pole that really interfered with ocean circulation, and interior part here was pretty desert-like, okay, very dry. Now there was an area down here, what is called Gondwana. This is sort of a wet zone, and this is where dinosaurs originated. Okay, down this, our oldest dinosaur fossils come from down here. All right, and then it started splitting up. All right, so the whole point being, okay, with marine life, where do you find most marine life? Is not out in the middle of the ocean. You find some, but most marine life are along continental shelves. Okay, when you take all these continents and put them together, then you don't have anywhere near the coastline than what you have when they're all split up. This here has a lot more coastline habitat for life, all right? So this probably contributed, but nonetheless, the major idea here is the volcanic eruptions, that they disrupted the climate and conditions and was a pretty big extinction, all right? So interior, depends on where you're at. I say cold. Toward the equator, it's still dry but hot. Further north and south of the equator, cold and dry, and most of Pangea at that time. We know this based on fossils, okay? Enough information is left there. All right, so that's the end of the Paleozoic, but it also marks the beginning of the Mesozoic. Now these words, paleo, to help you remember, a lot of times it's helpful to understand what the roots mean. Paleo is old. Zoic, animal. Zoo, okay, animal. And Mesozoic is middle. Meso meaning middle, so it's the middle line. So here, this is where gymnosperms really spread. Now note here that I already said that the gymnosperms originated, seed plants originated in the Paleozoic, but the dominant plants at the time were ferns, okay, not seed plants. Here, they become dominant. So this point here is during the early Mesozoic, gymnosperms really spread throughout the earth. They become the main plant, terrestrial type of plant. They outcompete and outgrow ferns, which happen to be more dominant before. All right, now the first part, I said you don't need to know these periods, but I'll put them up here anyway. The oldest, Triassic, followed by Jurassic, Cretaceous, going this way. All right, so this begins at 250, ends about 210, no, 201. And I don't know that beginning there, but this here ends 65 or 66 million years ago, okay? All right, so right at the very beginning of the Triassic, there's not a whole lot of fossils, okay? There's a few that have come over that survived from the mass extinction at the end, but by the time we get to the middle of the Triassic, things are starting to recover, okay? Starting to recover. Incidentally, let me jump back here. Both of these two clays, cerapsids, synapsids, they were there at the end of the Paleozoic. But these were the most abundant. These were the most abundant. These were rare. But after the mass extinction, it was the other way around. These are rare, and these become the most dominant. Out of this comes dinosaurs. Okay, and a lot of times the Mesozoic is called the age of the reptiles, but it was probably fully accidental who survived. Okay. All right. Anyway, then actually they began in the late Triassic. Late Triassic dinosaurs Very interesting group of organisms, and they last until the end of the Cretaceous, where most of them go extinct. And also the mammals, very early mammals, stem mammals, they do occur down here, okay? They are, in fact, the earliest dinosaurs probably ate these things, because most mammals were about the size of a rat, Clive was talking, okay? Now, do we have fossils that have fur? No, but there's other diagnostic bone structures and skeletons that tell us that they were mammals, okay? For example, the articulation of the jaw. I'm not going to get into that right now, we'll come to that a little bit later on, but that's pretty unique for mammals. And so the earliest stem mammals. Now, when I said early, let's go back here, Paleozoic. I mentioned the ancestor of the mammals. I'm talking about synapsids, not mammals. Mammals are synapsids, but these are earlier forms that are not mammals, okay? Whereas here in the Triassic, we have modified mammals, but they're stem groups, they're not modern groups. And all throughout the Mesozoic, the mammals stay about the size of a shrew and no bigger than a rat. They're all very, very small. Because the major, in most ecosystems, both as herbivores and as carnivores, the dominant life was reptilia, mostly dinosaurs, but not always completely dinosaurs. Okay, and so, yeah, this here is a mammal. Okay, canine teeth, dinosaurs and reptiles do not have canine teeth. The jaw, single, it's called dentary, whereas in reptiles this consists of about 3 different bones, right? So, and late Jurassic, the first Archaeopteryx, first bird, that's classified as a bird, but it's more dinosaur-like than it is bird-like. I already mentioned that's a transitional form. And this is actually in the Cretaceous, about 127 million years ago. The first flowering plants, okay, they appeared. Now, what's significant about flowering plants is that they're reproductively more successful than gymnosperms are. And so over a period from about 127 to about 85 million years ago, in the fossil record, angiosperms go from 0% of the flora to about 85%. And so they rapidly spread over that 50 million year period to become the dominant life form. If you look out here, almost all the plants you see are flowering plants. Now, not because they have big blooms. Some flowers are tiny, green, and you never hardly see them. But structurally, they're still flower. And when we get plants, we'll talk about that. All right, so these are dinosaurs, okay? This here is called Anchiornis. It's not a bird. That is not a bird. That is a theropod dinosaur. And the coloration is accurate. Now, how do we know this? Well, because these are some really nice fossils from China, northeast China, that dates to 125 million years ago. Feathers are there, and within the feathers there are structures that are called melanosomes that contain pigment. Okay, now when these were first discovered, looking at these feathers through electron microscope, this is by a guy named Venter. He was at Yale. He was actually a graduate student there, but he came up with the idea because he studied feathers looking at the melanosomes, and they are different shape. They are sort of oblong, they are black, they're circular, they're white pigments, and there's other things that cause the red pigments. So with investigate, they have over 1,000 specimens of this. It was really abundant. Okay, you have a lot of specimens. And therefore, studying the melanosome distribution in the feathers, they can come up with the real color on some of these, not on all of them. All right? And this is ceratopsian. That's everyone's lovely child, T-Rex, and so forth. Stegosaurs, they went extinct before the end of the age of dinosaurs, so forth. All right. You've been taught that that's a dinosaur? It's not. Okay? Pterosaurs are not dinosaurs. They're the sister group of the dinosaurs. I'm going to ruin everything you've been told about dinosaurs. I'm going to ruin your memories. Now, these things are sister groups to the dinosaurs, but they're close to the dinosaurs, but they are not dinosaurs. Okay? What else here? Archaeopteryx. Now, this here is an old painting, full of imagination, okay? Before they ever found the melanosomes in the feathers, this here was as black as a crow, okay? It really wasn't this color. And it's about the size of a crow, too. Now, this is a modified bird, but long bony tail. Modern birds do not have a long bony tail, but theropod dinosaurs definitely did. Has teeth, claws on its wings, and of course has a lot of other characteristics that are more dinosaur than they are bird, but still it's classified as the oldest fossil bird. Okay? But it's still quite a bit different than modern birds. Modern birds have a lot of other apomorphies that this thing does not have. Okay, Mesozoic. It came to an end with a mass extinction. Okay, there's been about 5 major mass extinctions. Extinction happens all the time, but some of them are relatively minor. So when I'm talking about a mass extinction, it's a lot of critters all die at the same time. And this has been talked about because all the non-avian dinosaurs ended here. All of the lineages, all the ceratopsians, duck-billed dinosaurs and so forth, they all disappeared, okay? And for a long time, it's been argued what has happened, okay? That the climate became too hot, climate became too cold. Gary Larson, cartoonist, they began smoking and died of cancer, okay? Which probably was the case. But no one's been a big mystery what caused this type of extinction. And this is called the Cretaceous crisis because it happened at the end of the Cretaceous, the last period of the Mesozoic, right there. And, but the biggest, this showed up in the 1990s, the impact hypothesis, which we now have a lot of support for. This is the belief that a big, really big rock, okay, asteroid hit the Earth and created such climatic havoc. This was very rapid extinction. Now, everyone is always concentrating on extinction of dinosaurs, but there's a bunch of other things that went extinct at this time, not just the dinosaurs. Some plant groups have disappeared. Some reptilian, non-dinosaur reptilian groups have disappeared. Even mammals have disappeared. Now, this here, what is the evidence? Okay, now, the first evidence for this came back in the 1990s. In fact, I think it was 1990. Father and son team from UC Berkeley named Alvarez. They were studying this transitional clay layer in the Alps in Switzerland, and they found a real high amount of iridium in that particular clay layer. Later, during the 1990s, this exposed, this is right at the boundary between Mesozoic and Cenozoic. They found, everywhere they looked on Earth, they found this anomaly. Now, iridium does occur on Earth, but not in such high abundance on the surface. Further down in a mantle, yes, high amount, but not up in, even in volcanoes, volcanic eruptions, there's still not enough iridium to account for what's in this layer. But asteroids that hit the Earth, they have a lot of it. Okay, So the belief was that this iridium came from a meteor impact. Calculation based on the layer of iridium that they found everywhere at this boundary layer throughout the world had to be something like a diameter of 6 to 10 miles. Pretty big rock, okay? And it would release a lot of energy when it happened to hit. Now, they couldn't find for a long time the crater, but eventually in the early 2000s, under Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, it's been buried, filled in with sediment. But geologists and others drilling for oil off the coast of Yucatan, and even in Yucatan, they found evidence of a impact, okay? In that area, that is the right age. Okay, so let me go here to a map. Artist, so hit right in here. Chicxulub crater is what it's called, and they even know the from the way the rocks are arranged there. They even know the angle at which it happened to hit. Okay. Now, what would this do? Okay, some of the effects are pretty global. One thing, this created enough energy that it would throw a lot of material up into the stratosphere. Not just our atmosphere, troposphere. That's where we mostly live, is in the troposphere, but above it is something called the stratosphere. And that would have been ejected way up there. And having all that stuff up there, eventually it will come out, but it takes years for the stratosphere to clear. That reduces inflow of light, okay, worldwide, inflow of light, which would influence and kill off a lot of plants, okay, that are dependent on photosynthesis. But other animals eat plants, and so it had an ecological chain effect, we believe, that contributed to most of the big things not surviving. What did survive of both reptiles and mammals were usually animals that ate seeds. Seeds can survive for years, and furthermore, they lived underground. Okay, most of those are the ones that were less impacted. Okay, now close to the impact, there's a lot of evidence of widespread fires. Okay, a lot of forests in the southeastern part of the United States, fossil forests that have been not only burned, but all of the trees have been knocked over in one direction, okay, due to the shock wave that would have come from this impact. That has been found as well. And so photosynthesis has been reduced for many years. And also because of the material in the stratosphere, temperatures would have come very, very low. So things got cold. All right, and that was the end. All the big guys disappeared. Okay, so this wasn't a mass extinction that was as widespread or intense as the Permian crisis. That one was real big, but still this did wipe out all the major large animals. The first fossils that we have over into the Cenozoic, they're all small animals, and very small. But then, with the dinosaurs gone, this allowed for mammals to expand. Okay, ecological release. Because, as I said, most of the major herbivores and carnivores that occupied major positions in ecosystems in the Mesozoic were dinosaurs, and that prevented other animals from evolving into that space. But once they have been removed, then we get the diversification of mammals. And it's sort of a strange to recall this Cenozoic from that time, 6 million years ago to today, we're in the Cenozoic. And I'm not going to go into the various groups of animals that mammals have expanded. Just know that we have the radiation of mammals. Furthermore, the radiation of grasses about 40 million years ago. Now, grasses are a special type of group of flowering plants. They're flowering plants. Not only do they produce seeds, they have flowers too, even though you may not have seen them. They're green, but they did evolve all the way back into the Cretaceous, okay, the last part of the Cenozoic. However,
However, they really spread and became grassland become widespread since. Now that's important because now we have huge herds that evolved of herbivores that were made, that fed on grass. Pleistocene is the last epoch of the Cenozoic, where we have glaciations. The last one, which peaked 25,000 years ago, and eventually disappeared about 15,000 years ago. It's out of this that we have humans come about. All right, so I'm not going to talk anything about this, but I do want to end on human evolution right here. Many misconceptions. For example, that chimpanzees were ancestors. You should know by now that chimpanzees and modern humans, they do share a common ancestor, but that common ancestor was neither human nor chimpanzee, okay? It may have been more chimpanzee-like, but common ancestors are not the same as okay? Common ancestor is not the same as the daughter species, okay? Morphologically and behaviorally, it's probably more similar to that, but not the same. All right, so chimpanzees are modern animals, just like modern humans are. They were not stooped over cave dwellers. A lot of material of humans have been found in caves simply because they're preserved there. They did use these as shelters, but they also probably built grass huts and everything like that out in the middle of the landscape where nothing remains anymore because human activities. And human activity as well as erosion has erased that because these have been protected in cave-like areas. Okay, Fred Flintstone, any of you guys remember Flintstone? Do they still show those things? Sort of, okay. They're not contemporary. Dinosaurs disappeared. The big dinosaurs, except for birds, disappeared 66 million years ago. Humans of any sort are really, really recent. Okay, now a little bit of classification. Now, as I go through classification, we're hardly ever going to come down to the level of orders. We're mostly, in this class, I'm interested in you knowing about the major deep branches of the evolutionary tree, not the fine little sticks at the end, all right? Except for, since we belong to this, we're talking about us, I do want you to know something more about human classification. We belong to a mammalian order, okay, so we are mammals. In fact, we are, I'm just going to do some of this. Lineage, amniota. Now, I'm not going to do all the rest of it back here. And then synapsida. Okay, that's what we are, okay, in part. Okay, now I'm leaving out, there's some things in here, there's some things in here, so this is abbreviated, but nonetheless, we're mammals, but we belong to a mammalian group called primates. Primates, it includes all sorts of monkeys, lemurs, tarsiers, apes. Within it, superfamily, oh, you're gonna love this, Hominoidea, okay? Hominoidea is in a Linnaean classification, superfamily, and that's humans and the great apes. So humans, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, gibbons. Okay, these are apes. And within that is a family, Hominidae, humans, chimps, and gorillas. Subfamily, Hominini, humans and chimps. And then tribe Hominini, on humans and their extinct ancestors. Okay. I used to, in the past, always have students learn this, but I'm going to shorten some of the classification, okay, because there are a lot of words here, all right? Just know that there is a grouping of humans, great apes. You don't have to cough up this word. And then a subgroup of that includes just only the African apes. Okay, gibbons, orangutans, Eurasian Asian. Humans originated, best fossil evidence, all humans originated in Africa. Okay, and then within that, humans and chimpanzees appear to be sister groups. And then all extinct humans. This word I do want you to know, not the tribe, just hominine. Okay, that. You don't need to know these. Now, all these endings, they're based on what Linnaean, people using the Linnaean classification have agreed to what ending serves as a family. Suffix oidea is always a superfamily. Suffix ite is always a family. Ine is always a subfamily. Ini is always a tribe. Okay? But all I want you to know is not these names except for this last one. Okay? Because that is humans and all their fossil ancestors. All right? So we're the only ones of this group left. However, in the past, we do recognize we have fossils of many different human type of groups. So Homo sapiens were the only ones. Okay, so if I did phylogeny, then these are the apes, okay, superfamily. So with the family Hominidae, we're only talking about African apes. And with that, we're just to ourselves, okay, humans. All right, so what about human ancestors? We believe, based on both fossil and DNA evidence, that the split between the most recent common ancestor, chimp and human, was somewhere between 8 and 6 million years ago, okay? And the gorillas are real close. Gorillas are real close, so if we added gorillas up here on this phylogeny, then it'd be like that. Okay, they're the sister group to chimps and humans, right? But the DNA sequences and even the arrangement of genes on individual chromosomes are very, very similar to that of modern humans. Now, both chimps and gorillas, they have 48 chromosomes. Okay, 48. Whereas humans have 46. Why the difference? This is a good evidence, is that there's one human chromosome, it's relatively long, that it aligns gene for gene with 2 different chromosomes on a chimpanzee. And the genes line up perfectly, okay? We have exactly the same gene. So how is this to be interpreted? What do you think is the apomorphy? Plesiomorphy, okay? We have to go to an outgroup, right? Gorillas, they have 48. We go further, orangutans, gibbons, they have 48. So what's the apomorphy? 46. So that's apomorphic rate. What happened is that these 2 chromosomes, at the end, you have this repetitive sequence on all chromosomes, at the end of all chromosomes. Telomeres, okay? This repeating sequence motif repeats several times. you have that sequence right here in the middle of this human chromosome. Very clear evidence that the tips, ends of these chromosomes fuse together in the ancestor of hominids. Okay? Okay, how, if you find fossil bones, I'm not gonna finish this, this will be the last slide I go over. If you find fossil bones, sometimes it's just a skull, sometimes it's just a piece of the backbone, sometimes it's just pelvis. How can you tell that's a hominid? Okay, so hominini, okay, this branch of humans and their ancestors, relatives, called hominins as a noun. The major thing is bipedalism. This is the main apomorphy for this group. What is bipedalism? Walking on two legs. Chimpanzees can sometimes walk on two legs, but not very far and not very gracefully. They will go that type of stuff, all right? Not graceful like a human, okay? And we're always like that. That's what I'm referring to. That's the apomorphy, and that has made some really major impacts on the rest of our skeleton, okay? Including under the skull. Where does your spinal cord get into this brain case? Okay, into the skull. A little opening at the bottom called the foramen magnum. Right? Human foramen magnum is right underneath the skull. But on the chimpanzee, it's at the back of the skull. Okay? Right here. Okay? Human. Foramen magnum. Right underneath. This is still on the posterior part, the ventral on the skull. Because if chimpanzees had it in the same place as we do, they would be, they're on fours, they would be looking always down. They'd never be able to look up. You have to be able to look up, and that means that their opening to their brain has to be at a different position. All right, that's always obvious. And then femur, this bone right here, okay? In chimpanzees, from the hips, they're almost, the two femurs are almost absolutely parallel. But not with humans. We are at a slant in order to balance the upright stature. And the shape of the pelvis is sort of basin-like. That's a modification for bipedalism, standing straight up. Whereas with chimpanzees and gorillas, it's elongated. Instead of basin-shaped, it's elongated. And we don't have a grasping toe. You can't use your feet to hold your toothbrush and brush your teeth. You might try. Some of you might be able to actually do it though, right? No, you can't. We have a big toe. Chimpanzees and other apes, they can have, just like their hands, they can grab with their feet, okay? But if you're giving up that or walking all the time, it has to adapt to this type of position.
Do these changes relate to early humans, or are they still?
All hominids, yeah, to a varying degree. Okay, the oldest hominids, which I'll get into on Thursday, not today, some of them do have a grasping toe, okay? But they have other features that they were probably the earliest ones could do both. They could climb trees and they could walk, okay? So they have sort of, there's some earlier ones that have combinations in between, all right? Okay, these are all consequences of adapting to an upright position, walk around, all right? This is not related to bipedalism, but it's a second apomorphy. Almost all apes and monkeys have long canine teeth. Now, what are the canine teeth? You go up to the front of your teeth, there's these two flat ones, they're called incisors. You go a little bit over, you have this one pointed tooth. Okay, then behind that, that's the canines. They're real long in most mammals. Okay, like your dog, like your cat, long canines. Chimpanzees, in fact, we'll just show a picture. I'll come back to this. Those long teeth are canines. And they probably were used for fighting, okay? But in early hominids, the canine teeth are very, very reduced. Now, simian gap, what is that? If you're gonna have long canines, they gotta fit in, and you wanna close your mouth, they gotta fit into a gap on each side. And that gap in the teeth is called the simian gap. Once our canines have reduced, that gap is gone. And so most hominid teeth do not have a simian gap. So I've given you here two apomorphies. These are consequences of bipedalism. That's the apomorphy. This is an apomorphy too. Okay? That's where I'm going to quit. Any questions?